Next question is from Kirsteen Sullivan.
Good morning, Minister. So we heard just last month that the government has announced plans to trial bill discounts for consumers in areas with high network constraints, but there hasn't been much detail on that as yet. Can you tell us how that will work in practice?
Yes, and we're going to take this forward later this year. It is, I don't want to say an experiment, but it is a pilot of seeing if we can make this work. Our belief is that absolutely there should be a way to make it work, but we want to make sure the market actually responds in the way that we think it will and that consumers can really benefit in the way that we think they will be able to. If I go back to the first principles of what we're hoping to achieve with it, the work we're doing around half-hourly settlement and around smart meter rollout and around consumer-led flex is all around trying to put consumers in the driving seat of their own energy, being able to switch on, turn up demand, turn off demand at times of peak pricing. There's already a number of tariffs in the energy market where people can do that. If you have an EV, for example, now it's quite possible you plug it in at night and it switches on and off throughout the night depending on cost of electricity. We want to extend that now to say, instead of us paying money to turn off wind behind a constraint, could we offer that at a reduced cost if people could turn up demand? The balancing of the system is such that we either have to switch off the wind or we have to increase the demand. There's no other way for us to utilise it unless we reduce the constraint. So while the constraints are in place, is this a common sense way for consumers to benefit by turning up demand, soaking up some of that wind that we would otherwise be paying to switch off and helping consumers? We want to do this on a relatively small scale to begin with, to just make sure consumers are actually able to take advantage of that and that the process works efficiently. But our hope is, if that is the case, we should be able to make much more of it in the future.
It's worth saying, if I may, the National Energy System Operator yesterday announced a scheme, a sort of practical example of how this can work, which would enable people to get financial reward for using electricity at times of excess supply in the summer, and that's a kind of practical example of how these arrangements can be put in place.
Yes, I think I read yesterday about doing your washing maybe when it's sunny and windy outside. So a lot of this will be about behavioural change. I'm sure you appreciate a lot of the language when we're talking about some of this stuff can be quite opaque to the average person in the street. So will there be some works that actually give very practical hints in everyday English that people can understand about what they can do to try and have some of that control back over their own billing?
You're absolutely right, and look, we've got a target of I think 12 gigawatts of consumer-led flex in the Clean Power roadmap, so we've got real ambition in the space of how much consumers can benefit from this, but it has to be driven by consumers getting a benefit. It also helps the system, so it is of mutual benefit, but we want to make sure this isn't about the government saying you should switch off at particular times to help the system. It's about saying, could you switch on in order to take advantage of cheaper tariffs? Could you benefit from this? But we need to make sure that is an offer that is available to everybody and that people are able to move on to tariffs where they can take advantage of that. Where we've still not seen smart meters being installed sufficiently, we're doing a lot of work to increase the pace on that. That will be really important. But yes, absolutely, in all the communications we're doing, it will be about reaching, particularly, if I may say so, the people who will benefit most from this, who are spending too much of their income on energy costs at the moment and who could really take advantage of this without having to change their lifestyle hugely.
I'm aware that the trial will only be in certain parts of the country to start with. How narrowly defined will the local discount areas be, and what criteria will determine which communities will qualify?
We are very early stages on designing what this will look like, so I can't go into any of that detail at this point in time. I think there's quite a lot of work we want to do in the background to work out what is a coherent pilot of this that gives us the evidence we need, but also is defined in clearly enough way that people know they're part of it and that we can demonstrate the impact it's having. So there's quite a bit of work to be doing. What we're hoping to sort of do this year is roll out plug-in solar by the summer, which will be the first time that will be available in the UK, very common in other European countries. And then as we move into the winter, have given a lot more detail on how consumers can benefit from our offer on wind. So there'll be more detail throughout the coming year.
So we know that constraint costs reached 1.8 billion last year, quite an eye-watering sum that, as you say, could be put to better use in bringing down consumer bills. How much of a reduction in those costs do you expect from increasing consumer flexibility and giving the consumer more control?
Look, it will play an important, but it's not going to reduce the cost entirely. So we think it will play an important part, and it's, apart from anything else, it's just better to be in consumers' pockets than as switching off wind. So it's just as a principle, we think it's really important. It's not going to deal with the entire constraint, so we've not said that it will. It will help, but fundamentally, constraints occur when we don't have enough network capacity, and so the only way to reduce it is to build more network, but also to build a more efficient system in the future, so that we're not building more grid than we need. To go back to Mr McAllister's point, the more efficient grid we can build, the cheaper it is for consumers. But it will play a part. And look, I just repeat this point: constraint payments are something that we absolutely need to reduce as a country. It is an appalling waste of money. I think people might be surprised to know the vast majority of it is not on turning off wind, it's on turning up gas somewhere else in the country to compensate for the wind being turned off. So in all cases, it's in all of our interest to reduce those constraints, and that's why building the network as fast as possible is key.
And if I could just ask you one final question, Minister. COP26 in Glasgow 2021 was perhaps the halcyon days of political consensus around the need to move towards clean power and energy independence, and a key part of that was the role of renewable energy. I just wonder if you could tell me what efforts you're making to try and bring that back, that consensus which is fragmented, perhaps not to the benefit of consumers.
I think it's genuinely a hugely important question. The consensus was why we achieved so much as we did as a country, and I sort of half joke, I think I'm the only person left standing that defends the previous government's record on building renewables, because they don't anymore, but it was an important mission for us to be on. And I've told the story before, but I was at the closure of Britain's last coal power station, Ratcliffe-on-Soar, and I met a number of international journalists from Asia in particular, who were genuinely curious: how did a country that had governments of the left and right alternating over many years phase out coal over a period of time? And it was because we had a consensus on climate change being a real and present threat to the country, and that renewables were the right thing for us to move forward on. That consensus is critical. Now, I think it is fractured but not broken. There are still a significant number of people in all political parties who believe it is the right thing to do, and perhaps even more important than that, the public believe it's the right thing to do, and actually poll after poll says they think the government should be doing even more to tackle climate change. This is not some future threat, but a very present reality that we're seeing with flooding and with increased numbers of storms that we're having to respond to. And so we have to do everything we can to tackle it. But it's also, right now, at this moment in time, the moment to redouble our efforts, because we have been subject to the volatility of fossil fuels again and again and again. Half the recessions we've faced as a country have been caused by fossil fuel shocks that we have no part to play in. We have to get off that roller coaster as fast as possible. So we are doing everything we can to rebuild that consensus, to work globally on new partnerships around clean energy. I was at the G20 in South Africa last year. What was absolutely clear was every single country is moving towards a transition away from fossil fuels, starting from a different place and at a different pace. But the world is on this journey, and by working together, particularly with our partners and allies in Europe, we can achieve both climate action but also the energy security we need in an increasingly uncertain world.